what up? This is Josh Rubin from East West Healing and Performance, and today I want to talk about the bump on my nose and the swelling in my forehead. No, I'm just kidding. That's what happens when you try to do box jumps with a box against the wall and somehow miss the box a little and decide to kiss the cement wall. But I'm a tough guy. I can handle it. Today we're going to talk about sleep apnea and its correlation to the thyroid. Now, I'm not saying if you have sleep apnea you should stop using your CPAP or start taking thyroid medication. What we're saying is maybe try finding a doctor that might work with you to do some more lab testing to get a full thyroid panel. Or maybe on your own, try incorporating some of our nutritional philosophies from watching our YouTubes, downloading the free ebook on our website, or maybe doing some one-on-one consulting with us or signing up for our Fight Fatigue with Food program to better help you set that nutritional foundation, because as you will learn, that is huge to upregulate energy production and thyroid hormone in the body. Now, what is sleep apnea? Read this. According to Western medicine, sleep apnea is a medical diagnosis where it's characterized by pausing in breathing while sleeping, which can lead to, many other diseases down the line if untreated, heart disease and high cholesterol and yada, yada, yada. What happens is people actually stop breathing and it wakes them up, and they typically do a lot of snoring, and people sleep in different beds because your wife has to kick you and she can't sleep. So it can really wreak havoc, and then all of a sudden you turn into Darth Vader because you have to wear a CPAP, which is even worse. Now, that's typically what's recommended these days to fix the problem when people have sleep apnea. They tell you to lose weight, they tell you to avoid caffeine, they tell you to avoid stimulants, they tell you to avoid sleeping pills and sedatives, which I agree with because they believe that that can contribute to sleep apnea and changing the position of how you sleep, which I agree with all these, but they're not going to fix sleep apnea. There may be some things that can help manage it, but it's not going to fix. And then they say, okay, you need to CPAP, right? Which affects the airway pressure, and it keeps oxygen flowing into the system all the time. So when you stop breathing, you actually have oxygen. You can continue sleeping throughout the night. But you have to wear this big machine. You look like Darth Vader. You sound like Darth Vader, and it's probably slightly uncomfortable. So let's take a look at the thyroid and its correlation and how we believe, from a functional standpoint, sleep apnea has a huge correlation with the thyroid metabolism, and functional hypothyroidism. So if we look at the thyroid, I'm going to go through some of the things hormonally what's going on. We have stimulation of the hypothalamus, which sends TRH to the pituitary, which is thyroid releasing hormone. The pituitary gland releases TSH to the thyroid. TSH stimulates TPO activity, thyroid peroxidase, to use iodine to create T4 and T3. 93% of it is T4 and 7% of it is T3. Your thyroid actually produces a lot of T4. 60% of the T4 is converted to T3 in the liver. How is it converted to T3 in the liver? A lot of things. Most importantly, it actually requires glucose. 20% goes to basically inactive reverse T3. And 20% is converted to what's called T3S and T3AC. It's inactive. And that is actually, the T3S and T3AC is actually converted to T3 in the gut to the active form. So of course we believe that eating digestible metabolic foods is important, not only to upregulate metabolism, but to upregulate the gut and take the burden off the gut and the liver, and to feed the gut food that doesn't cause inflammation, so we can actually once again directly affect thyroid hormone conversion. The remaining T4 is converted to T3 peripherally in the tissues. Most of this happens in the liver. And when we talk about metabolism, we're talking about fuel. We're talking about all the biochemical, physiological reactions in the body. And the one thing that makes your body tick is fuel. Think about your body as a furnace, and it needs fuel, just like a furnace needs wood, to keep heat, to keep the fire going. And your body needs fuel. That's why we're recommending eating smaller meals throughout the day to keep that furnace going, because food, calories are fuel. When we don't get enough fuel, or the body doesn't get adequate fuel, the body ends up in a using state. Is that the term that anyone could use, but it's taken from the work of Diana Schwarzbein. And thus the amount of energy that is produced goes down because we're using more than we're taking in. So now we end up in an energy deficit. And this is how most people are living. They want to lose weight. So they eat more and they eat less and they work out more. They're expending more than they're taking in, which has a negative effect on your metabolism. Same thing, a lot of people forget about eating and they go throughout the day and then they eat their first meal at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We're expending more than we're taking in, and we're wondering why we have sleep issues, fertility issues, PMS. We can't lose weight. We're losing too much weight, etc., etc. Because the fuel coming in isn't enough to meet the demands that you're placing on your body. So over time, if we keep doing this, fatigue, basically the pituitary gets fatigued. And it doesn't signal the thyroid anymore to release TSH to stimulate its activity. Basically, what happens is the pituitary falls asleep and there's nothing wrong with the thyroid gland. And this is what's going on with most people. They actually have functional hypothyroidism. They don't have hypothyroidism. They have the looks of hypothyroidism, the symptoms of hypothyroidism, but they truly don't have hypothyroidism. The pituitary is overstressed. It's tired. And Dr. Karazian talks about this, and there's 3 ways that this can happen. The first is stress of any kind. Stress is stress is stress. Not eating the right foods, working, overtraining, whatever it may be, emotional stress, financial stress. But we find that a lot of it has to do with food, not eating the right food, and right food frequency throughout the day. The next is pregnancy, because of course, where more women are supporting an extra person, and they're not eating enough to meet the demands of all the energy that this fetus needs, as well as they need to get through that process. So when they come out of their pregnancy, they're just drained. And the third, which I love because we see this all the time with people, taking thyroid medication when you don't need it, self-diagnosing, or even a doctor recommending it. And what can happen is this: if you don't need it and you don't have hypothyroidism, there's nothing wrong with the thyroid, you can actually exhaust the pituitary. And this is why a lot of people say, well, I take thyroid medication, it's not working, and I actually feel worse, and I feel tired, and my heart races, and I can't sleep. It's because a lot of times you don't need it, and you're actually fatiguing the pituitary, which is not signaling the thyroid anymore. So you have to think about that. Now, why the thyroid in sleep apnea? Well, the biggest thing is carbon dioxide production. And this is what our body does. The science of it is our body uses many things. It uses basically sugar and different minerals, in T3, thyroid hormone, like I talked about, that conversion, and oxygen to produce CO2, ATP, and water. That's the science of it. The bottom line is our body uses the food we eat to help with the conversion of thyroid hormone so we can produce energy. So we have energy to do the things that we want. So we fill up our energy bank account. Just like if you were to drive your car needs fuel in order for you to drive your car. If you drive, you don't put enough fuel, what's going to happen? The car's going to break down over time. Things are going to burn out. Going back to what I said about being in a using state, this is the body being in a sympathetic state where they're not meeting the body's needs. It doesn't matter if you have a desk job or you overtrain, whatever it is. Everyone has different metabolic needs, but we have to meet our own needs. And we have to fuel ourselves throughout the day in order to meet our needs. And that's why we recommend people taking their temperature and pulse when they wake up in bed and throughout the day, so we can help them with our log figure out how much food they need and what their food frequency is. Because food frequency, not only the foods that we recommend, the digestible carbs, proteins, and fats, but the food frequency sets the stage to help regulate blood sugar, to help with the conversion of thyroid hormone, and help with kind of modulating our physiology so we can end up in a producing state. And if you don't meet your body's needs, as I mentioned, you're in a using state. And when we're in a using state, our cells are not receiving enough oxygen. They're not receiving enough glucose. We don't have enough stored glucose to convert thyroid hormone. What happens? Thus we have lack of energy production, and the body is shifted away from carbon dioxide production, or ATP, or energy production, and shifted towards producing lactic acid. This is an inflammatory state. Now, to simplify, it's really simple. Lactic acid is a metabolic burden to our physiology, to our metabolism, and to the body. It causes the liver to use even more stored glycogen, so it becomes even more of a metabolic burden because you need that to convert thyroid hormone, like I talked about earlier. So now if you're producing lactic acid, and you don't even have stored, glucose or glycogen, it's going to become even more of an energy drain on our system. And it continually moves our cells away from energy production and pushes us more into that using state. Now, when we're in this using state, as I mentioned, the body relies on stored energy. But when there is none, we don't have that glycogen stored, the body produces excess adrenaline. This is like our relief pitcher coming in to help us because we need this to stay alive. The body always tries to help us adapt and compensate. It's always trying to seek health. But the problem is the effects of this excess adrenaline. Now, we need adrenaline to help us in times of need, but we should come back to homeostasis. But we're not meeting our metabolic needs on a consistent basis. What happens is this excess adrenaline has a negative effect on respiration. And many studies have shown, and I'll kind of read this, have shown that adrenaline causes apnea partly by increasing cerebral blood flow and washing out carbon dioxide, and partly by a direct action on the nerve cells of the respiratory center. And I'll actually attach a blog that we wrote below in the description to a journal article that we have supporting this. So adrenaline not only has a negative effect on many parts of the body, but it has a negative effect on carbon dioxide production, which has a huge impact on how we breathe, energy production, which leads to apnea. Now, if we talk about respiration, because that's a huge part of sleep apnea, anything that interferes with respiration, such as excess lactic acid production, there's going to be an increase in destructive oxidation. And this inflammatory process or destructive oxidation causes hypoxia at the cell level. So now you have even more or less CO2 actually being produced. And estrogen does the same thing. They have a negative effect on how our cells use glucose. So we're not producing CO2 anymore, which has a negative effect on respiration, as I just talked about. And which causes our tissues to become hypoxic and as well causes hyperventilation. Most people that have sleep apnea are actually hyperventilating. The definition of hyperventilation states that you're breathing more than your body requires. There is so much CO2 lost in the breath that our tissue and cell respiration is impaired or lost, creating this tissue suffocation. And to quote Ray Pete, PhD, hypothyroid people do not make enough carbon dioxide, like we just talked about, or progesterone. And so they're in a chronic state of hypoventilation or hypocapnia. So hopefully you can connect the dots with that. Of course, this is a YouTube. It's not an 8-hour lecture or class. But hopefully this maybe sparks some interest to do some research on maybe the correlation between the thyroid and energy production, CO2 production, and how we breathe. Now, what do? Of course, there's a lot to it. And of course, we work with clients one-on-one all over the world to help people work through and create an individualized process. But some things that you can do that we recommend to increase cellular respiration while maybe you're on your CPAP is, of course, maybe try to cut down on stimulants and caffeine. Definitely try to lose some weight. Work on your sleeping positions like they talk about. Of course, eliminate, sleep aids and things like that, which are highly, not only, damaging to the body, but highly toxic. Other things that you can do to increase cellular respiration or the body's production of carbon dioxide for you YouTube viewers would be to eating the right types of foods. And we recommend people eating digestible metabolic foods, carbs, proteins, and fats. We're talking about fruits and roots, ripe fruits and roots. We're talking about things like broth and gelatin and dairy and fish and whitefish and eggs. And some meat and chicken and things like that, but lesser amounts. We're talking about fats like coconut oil and butter and ghee and olive oil. We're not talking about nuts and seeds and nut oils. We're not talking about fatty fish. We're not talking about nut and seed oils. We're not talking about above ground vegetables and leafy greens. We're talking about digestible metabolic foods that actually feed our body, just like diesel fuel feeds a diesel engine. The other thing you can do is focus on your food frequency. How many meals a day do you need to regulate energy production, which is seen through body temperature and pulse? We actually have a YouTube on that, and I'll put that in the description. But this is what we teach our clients, because body temperature and pulse was actually brought to our attention by Dr. Broda Barnes. And what you're looking at in a simplified sense is you're looking at how much thyroid hormone you're actually producing, how much you're converting, and how much CO2 you're producing, which is energy, and that's seen through body temperature and pulse. If you're 36.4 to 37 Celsius, or 97.8 to 98.6, you're within the norm. You're producing energy. Now, it doesn't mean you're healed, it just means you're moving in the right direction. So how many meals a day right now in your healing phase do you need? Of course, some people start out with 3, and then 4, and then 5, and then 6. We usually work them up to 5 or 6 to constantly get that fuel throughout the day to make sure they're meeting their metabolic needs. They're meeting their body, in a sense, what they're expending now, or what they're taking in now is meeting or exceeding what they're expending. Of course, this is a simplified version, but those are 2 things that you could do to get started to maybe support the state that you're in while you have sleep apnea at this point. So hopefully you've enjoyed this YouTube clip. I'm out of here.